Ready?
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming here today. You know, it's actually the rain held off, so it's a nice, beautiful, cold day, perfect for those scarves you're wearing. So, anyway, I want to welcome you all for attending Pacific Research Institute's lunch event here, where we're celebrating National School Choice Week. I want to thank Tim Anaya back there, PRI's Communications Director, for putting together today's event. Tim is our impresario over here, so we're all actors in his play. Thanks, Tim. My name is, I know a lot of you here, a lot of you are my friends, but also there are some of you who may not know who I am. I'm Lance Izumi, and I'm the Correct Senior Fellow in Education Studies and the Senior Director of the Center for Education at the Pacific Research Institute. I've had the pleasure of being at PRI for, can you believe it, 24 years. Like, that is almost a quarter of a century, which to me is mind-blowing, you know? And so, of course, you know, I'm sure for all of you who have kids who are now in college, it's probably mind-blowing too, right? I also served 2 terms as president of the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges, which is the largest system of higher education in the country. And just FYI, for those of you who you know, do read education publications, I've been named an opinion contributor to Education Week, which is the nation's top education news source. And so I'm doing a point-counterpoint series with my liberal-leaning but very good friend, Bruce Fuller, who's a professor down at UC Berkeley. Now, in my position here at PRI, you know, the thing I do is I write books, I write studies, I write other types of publications. And so each of you has a copy at your seat of my newest publication, which is an American Education Agenda. And in this publication, I make my top 15 recommendations for improving education in the country. 5 of them directed at the federal government, and 10 of them directed at state and local governments, because, you know, education is and certainly should be mainly a state and local concern. So anyway, before I kind of get into the substance of my talk today about school choice, let me tell you a little bit about National School Choice Week and why it is we're celebrating that today. First of all, let me start with a bit of background. National School Choice Week is always held at the end of January, and it was started in 2011, and it's actually now the world's largest annual celebration of opportunity in education. Over the past 7 years, there's been more than 58,000 National School Choice events that have been held here in the United States and across the world. During National School Choice Week, organizations like the Pacific Research Institute, plus schools, homeschool groups, community groups, and individuals plan tens of thousands of independent events across the country that promote awareness of the benefits of K-12 school choice options that can bring good things to children, parents, and their communities. So thank you for participating in ours today. National School Choice Week does not prefer any particular type of education option over another. We trust parents to make the best choices for their individual children. And through the years, I've had the opportunity to travel across California during National School Choice Week, and I've spoken to a wide array of people and groups. One year, in fact, I was invited to participate in National School Choice Week's National Whistle Stop Train Tour, which was a cross-country trip that made stops all across America, celebrating school choice and kicking off various events. When I was on that whistle stop tour, I was with Andrew Campanella, who is the president of National School Choice Week, plus some of my colleagues in the think tank business, and we actually taped a television commentary while we were on the train as we were going from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And so let me say policy-wise that unlike some trains in California, this was a train to somewhere. So, see, I knew that in this room that people would get that. Anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention before going on about school choice is one of the questions that we get a lot during National School Choice Week is, what's up with the yellow scarves? You know, so we all have you wearing one here today, and let me give you a little bit of history behind the scarves. The National School Choice Week people felt that they needed something that would be a recognized symbol of opportunity and choice here in America. And these scarves that were designed to provide a really bright and colorful and energetic way to start conversations, to inform people, and symbolize the commitment of school choice supporters to giving children the education options they need in order to succeed. Now, one of my friends, a woman named Cecilia Iglesias, who is a school board member down in Santa Ana, and she's one of the most incredible grassroots education choice activists I've ever met in my life. She wears this scarf, I think, every day of the year. Not just during National School Choice Week. I mean, you look at her Facebook page, and it's incredible. I mean, she's going to the grocery store with the yellow scarf on. I am sure that she goes to bed every night wearing the school choice scarf. So we're taping this event here today, and so Cecilia, if you're watching this thing, I want to say that you are my hero. So thanks, Cecilia. So what about school choice? Now, I know that a lot of you here probably know what school choice is, but you know, we do have a broad cross-section of folks here, and also we have the viewing audience. In fact, talking about people in the audience here, we just had Assemblymember Kevin Kiley join us here today. Thank you very much. And so some folks may not actually be very familiar with school choice. So let me just give you a short definition of what we mean by choice. School choice simply means giving parents access to the best K-12 education options for their children. Now, beyond that definition, I think it's important to stress that some people think that when you say school's choice, that automatically means only education options offered by the private sector. And that's not true, because National School Choice Week recognizes all K-12 choice options that are available through traditional public schools, public charter schools, public magnet schools, private schools, online academies, and homeschooling. So let's take California as an example. As most of us know here, California has a number of different types of education choice options. And one of those options has been the Districts of Choice program that was based on a 1993 state law that allows students to transfer to school districts that have agreed to become so-called districts of choice. Under this law, the districts of choice agree to accept interested students regardless of their academic abilities or personal characteristics. Second, students wanting to take advantage of the districts of choice program generally do not need to seek permission from their home district. So currently there are 47 districts of choice serving about 10,000 transfer students in California. Now this program was going to expire last year, but at the last minute it was renewed for another 6 years. And I would like to point out that one of the reasons that the Districts of Choice program was saved was due, I think, to a really great report on the program put out by the Legislative Analyst's Office last year. I believe we have Ken from the Legislative Analyst's Office who is with us here today and who is the author of this report. So I want to thank the LAO for all your great work on that report and all the other issues that you bring up. We appreciate it. I know that I have used LAO reports for as long as I've been doing policy work here in California, so appreciate that. So I want to quote a couple of things from that LAO report, not just because they are about this Districts of Choice program, but because what's in that report actually applies to school choice generally speaking. The LAO report says that the Districts of Choice program provides these choice students with additional education opportunities that are unavailable in their home districts. These academic opportunities include college prep programs, such as the International Baccalaureate program, academies with thematic focuses, for example, on math or science, or schools with a specific instructional philosophy. Now, that's one of the main reasons why students and their parents want to exercise in choice, generally speaking, not just in the Districts of Choice program. For example, a few years ago, I interviewed a mom and dad in Santa Cruz County about their son who has autism. Their son's name is Mark, and he had been in a regular public school, but he didn't learn well in a classroom filled with other kids. and the teachers really had no idea how to address his individual learning needs. The parents were, of course, worried not only about Mark's lack of academic progress, but also about his safety, since school personnel would actually leave him unsupervised during parts of the school day, which they found to be just, maddening and very scary for them. The parents then pulled Mark out of the regular public school and enrolled him in a charter program that allowed them to educate him from home using a variety of online tools that were unavailable in the regular public school. In the home setting with those online tools, Mark really did come alive and thrive. And so it's that Mark is not alone. I mean, Mark's story is the story of so many kids who have different needs than, let's say, most of their classmates. And you want to give those kids with those particular needs, or anybody who feels as though they need a different setting for the education of their child, the opportunity to take advantage of what is available, whether it's a technological type of opportunity, or if it's a philosophical, or if it's a type of pedagogical option. People should have the opportunity to choose amongst all of that to see what's best for their child. Let me also quote another part of the LAO report. Most of the home districts we interviewed had responded to the program by taking steps to gain greater clarity about the priorities of their communities and by implementing new educational programs. Most home districts had improved their test scores over time. Districts reported that their efforts usually resulted in at least some reduction in the numbers of students seeking to transfer out. So in other words, competition worked, right? You had districts of choice where you had a receiving and a home district, and in order to compete with the receiving district, the home district had to basically up their game. And that's what the marketplace does. It forces lower quality producers to improve or else, right? And in fact, research on school choice programs generally have found exactly the same thing that the LAO found, which is that competition, whether it's in the form of charter schools or private schools, raises the performance of public schools. Several years ago, I did a film on the Swedish Universal Voucher Program. I think that people think that when you say Sweden, that it's mainly a socialistic country. But when you look at education in Sweden over the past 20 some odd years, you see that Sweden has actually had a more market-based system than the United States, because they do have this universal voucher program where money does follow the child to the public or private school that parents' choice. And I traveled to Stockholm and I interviewed the former education minister of Sweden, who oversaw the enactment and implementation of the Swedish voucher program. And one of the things that he told me that he was surprised at the time was that when he met with public school headmasters to discuss the voucher program, they didn't actually complain to him about the voucher program. What they said instead was that, well, if these private schools are doing something, then we, the public schools, can do it better. And so it actually served as a spur for them to improve their game. So that spirit of wanting to improve their product in education was because they didn't want to lose their customers, right? And who's their customers? Parents and their kids. If they lose their customers, they lose their funding, and all kinds of bad things, of course, follow after that. Now you compare that type of incentive with the supposed education solutions that governments rely upon to try and improve themselves. All right. I have a piece in today's Daily Caller, just by coincidence. You couldn't ask for better timing than this. But I have a piece in today's Daily Caller that looks at the murky record of the governor's local control funding formula. All right. And also the local control and accountability plans, the LCAPs. And whereas the Districts of Choice program opened up the avenue to better programs for underserved students, Ed Trust West found that the local control funding formula has not translated into more equitable opportunities for students in low-income schools. The highest poverty schools, says Ed Trust West, still have less access to the crucial school support staff and the rigorous and broad curriculum, and in some cases these gaps have widened. And while the competition spurred by the Districts of Choice program forced home districts to improve, reviews of how school districts use LCFF funding have found that districts rarely differentiate between new and ongoing government actions, making it impossible to determine whether districts were using this new funding generated under LCFF to pursue new actions to improve performance, or were they simply using it to continue and expand prior programs. So Cal Matters, which I'm sure a lot of you know of, Cal Matters journalist Jessica Calafati asked the largest school districts with the most disadvantaged students about how they spent money under the local control funding formula. And according to Calafati's report, she said that more than half of the districts refused to respond to any questions about their finances. A few would only say how much extra money for needy students they had received, not how they had spent it. And others complained about the burden of her inquiry. So in my American education agenda that all of you have, one of my recommendations is for greater transparency in education finance. And I believe we were supposed to, and I'm not sure if we do, but we were supposed to have some folks here from Assemblymember Shirley Weber's office. And I want to point out that in that recommendation on education transparency, I mentioned her proposal that would have improved transparency at all levels of government, state and local and school level, to see like where were those dollars that were appropriated actually going to. And I actually quote Assemblymember Weber, who said, "It's time that parents, policymakers, and the public are able to clearly follow the money and ensure that California's most vulnerable students are effectively served." And I think that's absolutely true, you know. Indeed, whether we have choice or not, but certainly, you know, if we want to make the best decisions, parents want to make the best decisions about their school, one of the things they need to have is they need to be able to see whether their schools are spending those dollars in the best possible way that will actually affect their kids and actually improve their performance, improve their safety, improve their quality of education. I would also point out that we have some members of the Public Policy Institute of California who are here today, and I cite the PPIC quite a bit, and one of the things that I have quoted is a PPIC report from looking at the LCFF's accountability plans, which, you know, I think they rightly observe, say that they depend partly on stronger local pressure generated through the engagement of parents and the public. Yet there's been little significant parental input into accountability plans because, unlike school choice plans and programs, parents don't see an immediate stake in the game as personal as their own child. So what LCFF's problems demonstrate is that competition is a far better spur to government doing the right thing than relying on it to reform itself. So if school choice and competition are good for parents, the public, and even for parents, their children, and even for public school systems, then what sorts of choice innovations are available, especially those that have been implemented by other states? And I think that's an important point, is that, you know, we here in California tend to think that, you know, all the policy innovation in the world goes on here in our state. Well, some does, but there's a lot, especially in the school choice area, a lot of policy innovation, especially over the last few years, has gone on in a lot of other states across the country. And so while I don't want to diminish the impact of public school choice programs, I'm going to focus the remaining time that I have in front of you here today to talk about 3 different types of school choice options that involve private schools. Okay, one are tax credit scholarship programs. The second is individual tax credits and deductions for private school expenses. And the third is education savings accounts. So what about tax credit scholarships? Well, these allow taxpayers to receive a full or partial tax credit when they donate to a nonprofit organization that provides private school scholarships to children. Eligible taxpayers can include individuals and also corporations, businesses. In some states, the scholarship giving nonprofit also provides innovation grants to public schools, and or to transportation assistance to students who choose alternative public schools. So in terms of the number of private school choice programs around the country, these tax credit scholarship programs are by far one of the most popular. As an example of a tax credit scholarship program, let me talk a bit about our neighbor to the south, Arizona. Arizona has a lot of school choice programs, but they were one of the first in the country to actually enact a tax credit scholarship program, which they put into place in 1997. Like other tax credit scholarship programs, the Arizona program allows taxpayers to receive tax credits for their donations to nonprofit organizations that provide these private school scholarships to K-12 students. So how much are they allowed? In the 2017 tax year, individual taxpayers in Arizona who contributed to these scholarship granting organizations could claim a dollar-for-dollar credit of up to a little bit more than $500. For married couples filing jointly, they could claim up to nearly $1,100. Now, what about student eligibility? Students must be in grades K-12 or they are a preschooler with a disability. So the nonprofits must consider financial need when awarding scholarships and cannot make the decision based solely on the donor's recommendation. In fact, individual taxpayers may not make contributions earmarked for their own dependents, and nor may those donors make agreements amongst one another to trade donations for their respective dependents. So it prevents of gaming the system for their own self-benefit. So Arizona's individual tax credit scholarship program is one of the most universal in the country. It doesn't restrict eligibility based upon some arbitrary family income level. Nor does it have any restrictions on prior public school enrollment status or any other factor. The program also excels by not restricting the amount that the nonprofit organization can award in a scholarship. So there is no cap on the scholarship amount. Another plus for Arizona's individual scholarship program is that there's a lack of red tape on participating schools, which simply must comply with the state's private school regulations, including health, safety, and non-discrimination requirements. I think one of the things you will notice when you look at state laws on school choice, you find a huge varying degree of regulation by government in those school choice programs. Some, like Arizona here, have a much more hands-off, approach and lack of regulation and red tape. Others are much more highly regulated. And so I think that one of the things that, for those of you who are considering policy changes in California, it's a good idea to look at these different states. And I'd say one of the great resources that I use is a publication that is put out by an organization called EdChoice, which used to be the Friedman Foundation for School Choice based in Indianapolis. But they put out a great piece called The ABCs of School Choice. So if people want to find out, what the laws, the specifics of various laws in the country are with regard to choice programs, this is really kind of your Bible. So I'd also mention that with regard to Arizona, like how many people are we talking about? How many tax returns? So it turns out, and how many scholarships are awarded? Well, it turns out in 2015-16, there were more than 31,000 private school scholarships awarded. There are 50 scholarship granting nonprofit organizations now operating in Arizona, and the average scholarship amount is $1,700. I should also mention that Arizona also has a tax credit program for corporations that donate to nonprofit organizations that provide these private school scholarships to low-income K-12 kids. So the other program is universal. This is to low-income kids. So besides these tax credit scholarship programs, though, there are programs around the country that give tax credits and deductions to parents for approved educational expenses off of their own state income taxes, which can include private school tuition, books, supplies, computers, tutors, and transportation. And it's interesting to note that Illinois, of all places, which is a deep blue state like California, actually has a well-structured individual tax credit program which has been operating since 1999. Illinois allows all individuals, regardless of income level, to claim a credit from their state income tax for educational expenses for dependent students who attend a private or public school or are homeschooled. Qualified expenses include tuition, books, and lab or activity fees. And the credit is worth a maximum of $500. Now, of course, that's not a lot in the scheme of educational costs, but certainly it is something. There are more than 300,000 tax returns in Illinois that claim this tax credit. Now, while Illinois provides a tax credit, other states provide tax deductions. And Wisconsin offers a tax deductions for individuals who pay private school tuition, so they may reduce their taxable income. The deduction is worth up to $4,000 per child in grades K through 8 and up to $10,000 per child in grades 9 through 12. The tax deduction is also universal, so any Wisconsin taxpayer is eligible. Wisconsin's tax deduction has received, the program has received high marks from scholars for the fact that it has great eligibility, that it's wide eligibility, and also that the amounts that may be deducted are set at levels that are relatively high compared to other deduction programs across the country. But again, whether we're talking tax credits or deductions, those effectively cover really a relatively small part of the bill for anybody who is or wants to send their kid to a private school, right? So that's why even people who are able to take advantage of those types of programs actually would also rather have things such as education savings accounts, which allow them to have much larger parts of their tuition bills at private schools, for example, to be addressed. And so what is an education savings account? An education savings account allows parents to withdraw their kids from the public schools, receive a deposit of funds from the state usually into government authorized savings account with restricted but multiple uses. Those funds, which are often distributed to the families via some kind of debit card, can cover school tuition and fees, online learning programs, private tutoring, community college costs, higher education expenses, and other customized learning services and materials. Now, some ESAs, but not all, even allow students to use their funds to pay for a combination of public school courses and private services, so a blending of public and private. Now, in 2015, our neighbor to the east, Nevada, enacted the most far-reaching ESA program in the country. Nevada's ESA program was designed to provide parents with funds to pay for a variety of educational services for their children, again, including private school tuition, distance learning programs, tutoring, curriculum, therapy, dual enrollment, and other defined educational services. For students with special needs or those that live in families with incomes up to the top limit of the free and reduced lunch program, the annual account payments would be worth 100% of the statewide average basic support per pupil, which was around $5,700 in 2015-16. For all other students, annual account payments may be worth 90% of that statewide basic payment, which was around $5,100 in 2015-16. All right? The Nevada ESA program is probably the most comprehensive private school choice program in the country, but there's one hitch, which a few of you may know about. Even though the program is nearly universal, with 93% of the students in Nevada eligible for the program, and there are relatively high funding amounts, the Nevada legislature last year failed to provide funding for the program. So it's in place, but it's not funded. And the reason it wasn't funded was because in the middle of 2017, the Nevada legislature failed to come up with a compromise solution about the funding. Throughout the first part of the year, there was a lot of optimism that some compromise agreement was going to be reached amongst legislators from both parties. But at the end of the day, when push came to shove, they were unable to reach an agreement, and therefore the program as it stands now is unfunded. And unless Governor Sandoval calls a special session of the state legislature for 2018, which he can do, because Nevada is a part-time legislature, they won't have a chance to fund this program until 2019. So it's there, but it's not there. So, I mean, there's a lot of frustration, of course, amongst those who support choice for families and for children. And one of our counterparts in Nevada, the Nevada Policy Research Institute, observed that the real lesson to be learned from the 2000 Nevada legislative session is that for the opponents of educational choice, there is no such thing as compromise. And so, which is a very sad statement, not only for policy, but also for those kids, thousands of whom wanted to take advantage of this program in Nevada. So there certainly is room for some variation, I believe, on these types of programs that have been enacted and tried oftentimes for many years in other states, and that that California can look to. And I think that there is certainly support for a choice, actually, and not just choice at the margins. Choice, real, revolutionary choice here in California. You just have to look at the polling data that came out just last year. PPIC actually had a poll out on education, and what they found was that a large majority of Californians support school choice vouchers. Now vouchers, I know that most of you know, but for those of you who don't, vouchers attach government dollars to the student that may be used to pay for partial or full tuition at private schools. Now, there's been some conjecture, certainly within the school, those who support school choice, about whether we should continue to use the V word or not. And so, but the V word was used in, I believe, in this PPIC poll, and the results tell a much different story about whether that word itself is politically poisonous or not. According to the poll, 60% of adult Californians said they favored tax-funded vouchers. Among California parents, 2/3, 66%, said that they favored vouchers. The support was even higher amongst Latinos, with 69% saying they supported vouchers, and the highest level of support amongst the various subgroups were with African Americans, with 73% of African Americans supporting school choice vouchers, which is nearly 3/4 of those who responded. And this poll by PPIC has been validated with other polls that were taken last year. For example, EdSource, which many of you know, had a similar poll out. And what they found that even if you look geographically in California, even in places like, very deep blue Los Angeles, you found that support for vouchers was 53% in favor and 38% against. A 15 percentage point difference in Los Angeles in support of vouchers. So what that shows is that there is a deep reservoir of support for something that is much more than just tinkering around the edges here in California. And so, what I recommend in this American education agenda is for states. No, this is not just for California, of course, it's for all states and the federal government. I would recommend that you lawmakers at both the state, local, and federal levels look at more expansive choice options for kids, because talking with Tom Green over there, who's telling me about before this event, our event started today, about the thousands of kids that he saw in states that he's traveled to, Utah and other states, that there's huge amounts of kids from all walks of life who really need to have better choices. In my book, the Corrupt Classroom, which came out last year, I talk about not just the academic, we don't just talk about academic issues, we talk about the non-academic issues such as public safety, or the lack of safety on school campuses, the lack of good fiscal management at the school and district and state levels, and also with the undercutting of values amongst that schools often do with parents. And so that there are lots of these reasons which may not necessarily show up on a standardized test, that also are reasons for parents wanting to have greater choice for their children. And so why should you be forced to send your child, for example, to a supposedly good school if they're terribly unhappy because they are being physically threatened. In fact, in my book, The Corrupt Classroom, I mentioned one student in Indiana who was going to a supposedly good school near the Indianapolis area, but was always bullied and threatened. And so she was doing very poorly, but ended up being able to use a choice tool in Indiana to get out of that very terrible situation and then go to a school called Cristo Rey, a Catholic school. And at that school, she's been thriving. Now, that's not to say that every child is going to have that same type of experience, but we should let them have that choice. Parents should be that judge, and it shouldn't be somebody in some far off district bureaucracy or some off state capital or someplace in Washington who's making that choice for them. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for wearing your yellow scarves and coming here to celebrate National School Choice Week with all of us. And we hope that we'll see you, in the front lines of the choice battles in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. So thanks so much.